lovely to meet you to talk about the book. Thank you for having me.
Not at all.
What are you up to at the moment?
Well, I'm up to several things at the moment. We've been running something called the Montpellier Panel for the last 5 years. And it's a panel of experts on agriculture in Africa.
Yes.
And what we do is we produce reports. There was a very good report we did on soils the other day. I mean, and we've done a recent one on climate change in Africa. And they're all quite thin, and they're all easy to read, and they're very accessible. And basically, I've got a whole staff that's very good at doing that, and doing blogs and so on and so forth. So we spent 5 years doing that. We're now transitioning it. I'm not going to be the chair anymore. We're going to have 2 co-chairs, a man called Ousmane Badiane, who's in Senegal. He's the director for IFPRI in Africa. And he's going to be the new co-chair there and have a main office there. And then Joachim von Braun, who used to be the director of IFPRI and is now at the University of Bonn, is going to have the other hub in Germany, and I'm going to have a hub here. And my deputy here, Catherine Glatzel, is going to commute between here and Dakar in Senegal. And we're going to go on producing these kind of reports for African politicians and African NGOs working in agriculture. So it's very much geared towards them. We'll have, the panel will now be largely made up of African experts. So it'll be a really, I think, a really powerful group. And we're going to have a top level meeting with ministers of agriculture every year and talk about it in this way. So we feel it's a small niche in some respects, being able to get across to people who are leaders in agriculture in Africa, get across evidence-based recommendations for agricultural development. As I said, it's a niche, but we're actually quite good at it, so we go on doing it.
Fantastic.
So that's one thing I'm doing.
Okay.
The second thing is I'm engaged in writing a book called Food for All in Africa. And again, another thin book.
Oh, good.
And it's going to be authored by myself and Catherine Glatzel and Ousmane Badiane. And we've got 5 chapters, I think, virtually ready. And so we're going along with that, and we're quite pleased about it. Good. It's getting it so that people will actually really read it. You know?
Yes.
I have a big book called 1 Billion Hungry, which is used as a graduate textbook, but it's not exactly.
I've read it.
Well, there you are.
But it's a very
it's an authoritative textbook, but it's not something that people read over dinner or tea or in the morning. And the third thing is that we've got a program here which run by a former student of mine, PhD student of mine, called Eric Chavez. And he, when he was doing his PhD with me, developed a model. It's not really a model, it's a mathematical construct that gives you the probabilities of an extreme weather event for pixels which are about 5 square kilometers everywhere in the world.
Really?
And we're doing the runs of this model. It gives you the probability of this extreme event, like a drought, over 20 years. And it runs on a college computer. We've got it blocked over the Christmas holiday to do a 24-hour run. So
really?
It's everywhere in the world. And when you've got this, you can then produce good insurance information. Because it's based on climate change. It's got climate change, it's got weather, it's got physiology, it's got plant growth, it's got all those things, and insurance in there. The model's got all of those in there. Most insurance is based on the last 5 years' data or something, and doesn't necessarily give you a good view. This will give a good view. And the World Food Programme is now using this model as part of its insurance package for farmers at the moment in Tanzania. So we've got about, I think, 70,000 farmers in Tanzania at the moment. And their farmer associations are now insured for those extreme weather events over so many years and so on.
And the risk is taken by the market rather than
That's right. The risk is taken. It goes through. There's a big a reinsurer called Willis in London. They take it and then they sell on the insurance to other insurers, and they use our model as the basis for the good working of the model. I think is the right way to put it. I mean, it's a probability model. It doesn't say it's going to be drought this year or next year, but it says that's the probability, and so you know how much you need to financially put aside to cover any insurance eventuality. It sounds sort of rather esoteric, but actually it's very important. You know, at the moment in Africa, something like the average yield of maize in Africa, average yield of corn for any Americans listening, the average yield in maize in Africa is about just over 1 tonne per hectare. We know that if you get the right fertiliser, that's the right mixture of fertiliser of NPK, just absolutely the right mixture, if you apply it sparingly in the hole where the seed is going to go, and you provide also a micronutrient if there needs to be one. Southern Ethiopia, they need boron as a micronutrient. In Mozambique, they need lime as a micronutrient. You apply all of those things, you can get 5, 6, 7 tonnes. In fact, somebody came in to see me today, and she had seen maize with 9 tonnes I think in Zambia. That gets up to the European average. Now you could just imagine if you're a farmer who for all your life has been getting 750 kilos or 1 tonne per hectare. Now you get 5, 6, 7, 8 tonnes. It's a transformation.
Yeah, sure.
And we need it in part because we need the corn residue. We need the stover, as they call it. You know, all the leaves and all the stalks and everything else needs to go back into the ground to try and restore the soil. Now, once you start to get that back in there, you can actually move towards a more organic approach if you want to. In other words, you can stop applying fertiliser. You'll have enough going back if you do a rotation. So if you do maize and some kind of bean as a rotation, a legume as a rotation, you can then get the right build-up of the soils, because you know, at least a quarter, if not a third, of the soils in Africa are seriously degraded of sub-Saharan Africa. So that's what we're doing.
That's amazing, Sir Gordon. And you've worked on African agriculture and global agriculture for 40 years now? 30 years?
Yeah, well actually, I hate to say this, it's nearly 50 years. It's over 50 years.
Really?
And I started in Borneo.
Right.
I was 6 years in Borneo, and then I worked in Thailand for a year. I worked in India for 4 or 5 years. I did a lot of work in the Middle East, in Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, and the Sudan in the 1980s. And then more recently, I've been visiting Africa. But Africa, to me, has been something relatively new to understand. I mean, I've had visits before, but over the last 5 years, I've been going around to a large number of countries in Africa on visits and getting out into the field. I'm getting slightly older for this, getting out in the field, to be honest. I mean, the last visit to Rwanda was pretty rough because, as you know, Rwanda is all volcanic boulders, and so I was climbing up boulders to go and visit farmers with all the villagers helping me get up the boulders, and I thought, actually, I really should stop doing this kind of stuff.
Well, you're very young. And in the book that I'm trying to write, I have a chapter on soil or on agriculture, and I want to describe good projects around the world where farmers are doing the right thing or doing the best that they can do with international help. And you've mentioned this very interesting project with Tanzania, and I wonder whether there are any others that you particularly seem to you emblematic of the kind of work that could be done.
Well, I think what you see is bits and pieces of it. Conservation farming has been spreading quite fast in Africa. it spreads fairly naturally. Farmers see it and they like it. And basically, they discover that they don't have to plough, which saves a hell of a lot of labour and awful lot of cost. You can just lightly drill and sow the seed. Doing that on its own is, however, never enough. They've really got to do it with a rotation. They've got to do a rotation with, I don't know, pigeon peas or soybean or whatever. And some are doing that, but not enough. Just no-till on its own is never enough. So you can see some of that going on. That's quite good. The other thing that's happening is there's been a spread of agroforestry using a tree called Phytherbia. Phytherbia used to be called Albizia, but it's now called Phytherbia. It's a remarkable tree because it sheds its leaves in the wet season, just when every other tree's got leaves on. It's the most odd tree. But it's a legume. So when it sheds its leaves, the leaves fall down to the ground and they carry not only carbon to go into the soil, but they also carry, most important, they carry nitrogen. And so you can actually, under a mature stand of these trees, you can get 3 tons of maize per hectare without fertiliser. And that's great. It takes a while for those trees to grow up, of course. But it's a great system. One of its big advantages is it puts quite a bit of carbon back in the soil. Unfortunately, conservation farming doesn't put a lot of carbon back in the soil. But this gives you good yields without fertiliser, and it puts carbon back in the soil, and that's a real plus. They say there are lots of other agroforestry systems that work, and there's a man at Yale University who was at the conference.
Eric Toensmeyer, yes, yeah.
Eric Toensmeyer, and he's got a book that describes these various systems, and I still haven't been able to sit and go through them and see what they come up with. But in some ways, I think, let's go back a bit. The big issue is this. It's relatively straightforward, I say relatively, for farmers to adapt to climate change. You know, they see things changing. They see the growing season becoming shorter, so they get hold of shorter grain varieties, for example, shorter growing maize or shorter growing rice, and you can do that. They see other kind of changes going on that they have to do something about. They may even put in some terracing, even though there's a lot of labour, but they may see that actually they are losing a lot without the terrace. But that's pushing it a bit. In general, farmers are good at adapting, but not at mitigating. And what we all like to be doing is reducing the amount of carbon and nitrous oxide and methane that goes in the atmosphere. That's tough because it costs you to do that, it costs a farmer to do that, and they don't see any benefit for quite some time to come. The examples I've given you of conservation farming and Phytherbia agroforestry are examples where you get an adaptation that helps with climate change and will benefit in terms of mitigation. So it's a co-benefit.
Yes, that's good.
But they're rare. And the only other way you can get mitigation is by paying farmers to do things. In other words, if you want lots of terraces, you've got to pay farmers to do it. And that's true all around the world. I mean, I live in Sussex. The Sussex Downs are not looked after well. When it rains, the whole of the Sussex Downs come pouring down into the village. It's not my village because I'm further away, but there's a village nearby. You can actually see the soil pouring into the village.
Really?
They don't terrace. Yet, interestingly, when you go to the Midwest of the USA, I know a lot of it is flat, but some of it is quite mildly undulating. You go to Iowa, you see undulating land, and it's all terraced. But of course, it's government subsidies. Government, US subsidies, ever since the Dust Bowl, has given farmers money to make sure that their soil is better preserved. We still don't do it in Britain.
No.
We really don't do it in Britain. I mean, there are people who do good rotations, there are people who do things, but they're few and far between.
Very interesting. So if you could wave your magic wand to feed the world and broker a more sustainable and equitable food system and agricultural system, what sort of things would you focus on, Sigurd?
Well, it's easily said. Basically, if you're a farmer, a poor farmer, you need to feed yourself and your family, and you need some income. You need cash. You need cash to get your kids to school, and you need cash to pay for medicines and other things like that. And maybe you need cash to buy some more food because you're not producing enough. So you need not just a good farm, you need a good livelihood. And maybe other sources of income, not farming. So that's what you need there. For the farming, you need seed and fertilizer and other kinds of inputs. And you can get those from an agro-dealer. And there are lots of agro-dealers now springing up all over Eastern Africa. If you then start to get the kind of yields I've been talking about, if you start to get 3, 4, 5 tons per hectare, see, if you're a farmer and you've only got 1 hectare, if you can get 2 tons per hectare of maize, you can feed your farmer on half the hectare, and the other half you can grow bananas or sweet potato or whatever else, or beans, and sell them. So you need a market with them, and you need to be linked into a value chain. And the value chain often begins with having a good warehouse that you can get your own grain into and store it, not sell it, but store it, and sell it when you want to, because the grain in the store is yours, not somebody else's. Get a good store. If you've got good food processing going on, quite a bit of it's going on already, small scale food processing, people making snacks, for example, using soybean or maize to make little snacks. And then you need good national markets and international markets, you need good information. So you need those two things, you need the inputs and the outputs. If you put all those things together and you have a good government policy with good governance,
then you're in a good place.
Position. So I don't know how many minutes it took me to describe that.
2 or 3, but with 7 stages.
Yes,
it's
that's
an
right.
intricate.
And that is what I can see bits of. In some cases, I can see quite a lot of it. In some countries, in Rwanda, for example, you can see quite good examples of it. Even in Mozambique, I saw examples of the bits coming together. In Ghana, it's very good, where you can see all these bits coming together and working together. But it's putting those bits together, and that means a lot about Ministry of Agriculture policies and about governance. So,
and extension services, so that's
yes, but except the problem with extension services, the old-fashioned extension services more or less disappeared, where and there's not really a substitute for it at the moment. The agro dealers could become quite good extension services. Some of them do it, but they have to be able to give you, as it were, impartial advice as opposed to just pushing their own particular product. There are some examples. There's one in Rwanda where an organisation called the 1 Acre Fund is helping the Rwanda government to develop an extension service which is appropriate for very small farmers. But there's a big gap there.
Okay. And you've had a role, I think, historically with the Gates Foundation, or you've been intellectual support to them.
Yeah, well, I right at the beginning, when I was at the Rockefeller Foundation, Bill Gates' father, Bill Gates Sr., came to see me and said, my son wants to set up a foundation. He sent me to see you to give advice about how to set it up. So I gave them advice about how to set it up, and then he said, well, we want to know how to spend the money, and I gave them advice on that, and they got going. Okay, so I was in at the very beginning.
Terrific.
And the last 5 years I've had funds from the Gates Foundation to do this Montpellier panel. So I've had links with them over the time. And I was chief scientist at DFID when I came back to Britain, and so I've had strong links with the British government and the aid programme as well.
Really impressive. a lot of the work that the Prince of Wales has done has been on rainforest conservation and restoration within those landscapes, and the view is that clearly it's important to reconcile. Well, clearly agricultural production is central to those landscapes, but then hopefully the resilience of those landscapes can be enhanced through adequate protection of forest and restoration of degraded forest in some areas. But the economics of doing that aren't immediately straightforward in the current economic model within those landscapes.
Yes, I think the old system of somehow keeping forest and, as it were, putting some kind of boundary around it and having guards to prevent anything going doesn't work. And we discovered that when I worked in India for the Ford Foundation. The forest department in the state of Bengal came to see me and said, look, we can't go on the way we are now. Forest guards are getting killed by the villagers all the way through West Bengal. And we need more protection. And we think the answer is to give the villagers rights over the land. And so they developed a whole system in which the villagers got rights after, I can't remember how many years, 25 years or something like that. They got rights to part of the forest product at the end. I mean, if it was timber or something of that kind. And they also were able to go in the forest and harvest leaves and nuts and firewood and all the rest of those things. And that worked very well. I mean, it was called Joint Forest Management, and we funded it for the first couple of years. It was at the time it was illegal under the Indian government to do this, but West Bengal was a state that didn't actually care an awful lot about the central government in New Delhi at that time, and so they pioneered. And now it's national policy. So that was a nice thing to do. I think now, again, going back to something I was saying earlier, I think agroforestry is the key. If you can build agroforestry or silvopastoralism along the forest margins, you've got more chance, I think, of preserving the forest than just simply putting a fence or a wall up. And I hope that that's the way we're going to go. I've been involved in some meetings about that, but I just don't know how well we're going to get on with it.
Okay. And clearly there's a growing population. We're 7 billion, we're 9 billion in 2050, and climate change, we're at 404 parts per million or whatever, and ideally we'd be at 350 or lower. There's the sort of perfect storm scenario, but then there's also presumably a scenario which is worse than that, if such a thing is possible, or a scenario which is much better. And we're all driving a scenario in which we somehow navigate the next 50 to 100 years and address climate change in a meaningful fashion, and at the same time feed the world and at the same time protect the national environment.
I think the problem is it's actually the next 20 years, 15 to 20 years that we've got to do it. I mean, we've got we're on track for an increase in global warming by 2 degrees over pre-industrial. We're 1 degree above now. Going to be by 2 degrees by 2050 if we don't watch out. And that's going to be tough. I worked a lot with the Chinese government to help them prepare a climate policy. That was in the I don't know when that was, 10 years ago or more. And they bought it. They bought the fact that they had to get to a level emissions and then start to go down. And that is actually their policy, even though they don't make a lot of it, but it's in their 5-year plan. Getting it to go level has been easier because they've been cutting out old coal-fired power stations. And that's removed a great deal of their emissions. But to go down, is going to be tough, in particular because they need carbon capture and storage on their coal stations and other fossil fuel power stations. And we don't know how to do it, as you know. I mean, it's one of the great
unsolved question.
questions that we've got, and until we can actually get a cheap source of carbon capture and storage, keep not source but cheap mechanism for doing it, we're not going to make a big deal of progress, because although we're weaning ourselves off fossil fuel, it's a very slow occurrence. And of course, on the other side of all of this, what's happening in the Arctic is absolutely alarming.
Yes.
I don't know whether you've seen in the Observer yesterday.
Yes.
It's a very good article about what's going on. And it looks as though the melting of the Arctic is Arctic ice, which is dramatic. I mean, we had this figure of the temperature being in the Arctic being 20 degrees above normal for that time of year. It's a phenomenon.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
And what it's doing is driving it's a differential between those temperatures and the temperatures in the tropics that's driving the jet stream. So the jet stream is misbehaving, I suppose is the only way to put it. And that's causing chaos all around the world. So we're already in a situation which is getting close to a perfect storm. It's not as though the perfect storm is going to happen 20, 30 years from now.
Yeah, indeed.
It's getting very close. And I think that's what worries many of us, that there's not enough sense of urgency. And of course we're worried that the US government is not going to see this as a issue of great emergency, or even though they're signed up to COP21.
And we can only hope that Trump, once in power, honours the best of the current policies underway and sees sense. But the signs are very worrying at the moment, unquestionably. But one of the virtues of the Paris Agreement was that it locks in progress from other countries, nevertheless, and cities. And
it was in many ways, it was a great achievement. Although, believing that you want to get yourself down to eventually 1.5 is pretty tough.
Very tough. So, on the agricultural front, I imagine that you eschew the ideological extremes of organic versus GM and focus on the hallowed middle ground.
I'm a pragmatist. I mean, first of all, I think that the core of organic farming, which is about better soils, is absolutely essential. We need it desperately. We don't look after our soils well. That's true in the UK, it's true in around the world. And we need that. I don't just believe that you can only use organic inputs to get where you want to go. I think you have to make a virtue of using the organic inputs where they work. And I think they do work in many ways. I just don't want to make a sort of a ideological commitment to only using organic. In part because it gets to be nonsense when you start to talk about pesticides. I mean, many of the pesticides organic farmers use are actually worse than the pesticides, or not worse, but certainly as bad as the pesticides used by inorganic fertilizers. So that's at one extreme. The other is the GM. I think that in Africa in particular, the diseases that we face and pests of crops, particularly the diseases, are absolutely horrendous. We lose millions, if not billions, of farmer produce through pests and diseases and weeds. And I think there's a lot being done with conventional breeding. I think the breeding of hybrids, particularly hybrid maize, is very good. The breeding of hybrid rices is very good. I think there are going to be other hybrids along the way which are conventional but not GM. But I think we're going to need GM for some of those reasons. But again, I think it's not a magic bullet. I think there will be places, I'm going being pragmatic again, there will be places where I want to see it work. There are many other uses of GM that I don't like very much. I don't like the idea of GM in salmon fisheries. And and in general, I don't like the idea of GM where what you're doing is modifying plants, trees, which are close to the wild population. You know, I mean, if you modify GM, if you modify maize in Africa to be GM, there's no wild maize around. If you do it in Mexico, then you've got more likely problems. So I'm not just sitting in the middle, I'm being much more pragmatic between the two, what are seen as the two extremes.
Very, very clear. And how best to support women farmers in developing countries?
Well, there are two big challenges actually. One is to support women farmers and one is to support...
Sorry, dropped the phone. Yeah.
One is to support young people in Africa. I think we need much more research about women as farmers. One of the troubles is we have an awful lot of rhetoric about women in agriculture. And what we actually really need to do is to find out much more precisely what women do in agriculture and what are the barriers to what they do. There's actually an experiment going on in the world at the moment which we could study if we wanted to. One is that there are a lot of female-headed households that are farmers. You know, we often go in Africa to farms and there's a woman running the farm because the husband has contracted a disease and died or whatever. So you've got lots of farmers now in the world who are women, who run farms and the households, and others which are men and women. And we ought to be looking at both of those and discovering what the differences are. In what situations are women disadvantaged? In what situations are they maybe advantaged? And it may be, we don't know, to be honest. We don't know how women perform that. We know there are lots of barriers, that's for sure. And we also know that one of the big problems in farming is that women are overburdened already. Even producing less than 1 ton of maize is damn hard work for a woman. You know, because she's trying to keep this, particularly keep the maize free of weeds, which is the worst thing. But then there may be other things that come roaring in and kill the maize or the other crops. And she may have to collect water, she's got to get her kids to school, she's got to do all those things, you see. And we tend to make the statement that women are very good at multiple tasking, but multiple tasking for many women kills them. And so we've got to find ways in which women have less burden, providing, for example, water in villages, providing a source of fuel for maybe solar or whatever, so that women have less of that kind of burden and can then spend a bit more time on doing innovative agriculture or innovative income earning. At the moment they're trapped in a very hard, hostile world. When you come to young people, and of course that's the big issue in Africa because we've got massive growth of young people. The population explosion in East and West Africa is just enormous. You can't see any sign of the population plateauing out. It's just going to go on growing. And the big question is, what is it can young people do? Most of them, young boys anyway, young men, don't like the idea of going and hoeing away and digging weeds and doing all the rest. But many of them like the idea of machinery. And Africa is very deficient in machinery, farm machinery. If you go to Asia, go to a farm, there are lots of little machines. I mean, just a small one-wheel tractor. In other words, you walk along and it buzzes along and does the ploughing or the whatever else it is you want to do. And we need lots of that kind of machinery in Africa, so that farmers can do relatively hard work that would be otherwise hard work by hand, by machine, and they can then get higher yields and do other things as well. I saw some young men in Uganda, in Kampala, who had got a corn threshing machine that they discovered worked very well. They'd got the rights to it in some way, and they were making these machines, and they were leasing them, they were selling them, they were fixing them when they went wrong. And when you went to villages, there were all these young people coming and fixing your machine and making it work, or even coming in with their machine and doing it for you. And that's a good example of where you can get young people involved. I also saw in Rwanda just recently young people who finished secondary school, or were in secondary school anyway, even if they hadn't finished it. And they'd been trained to be entrepreneurs by TechnoServe. And they'd done a 3-month training in how you become an entrepreneur, which is sort of exciting. And at the end of that, they got loans from the Agricultural Bank of Rwanda. And one individual had got a loan. He was growing garlic, and he got great piles of garlic in his house, and they looked marvellous, and he was doing it. He was very pleased. I said, "You've got to watch out, because everybody else is going to start growing garlic." He said, "It's all right, I'll get to something else." I mean, it was that kind of attitude. And we met 12 young people who'd got a loan collectively as a kind of co-op. And they were using the money to grow and sell seed potatoes. They got 5 different seed potatoes. They were growing under polythene and selling. And they were doing extremely well. And they'd each then gone off as individuals and got an extra loan for them as individuals. And one woman was rearing rabbits and selling them. Another woman had bought a bar and hired a lot of rather tough young men to keep the bar running perfectly, and so on. So all 12 of these, and it was for me, it was absolutely eye-opening, because it was like standing in Silicon Valley, surrounded by entrepreneurs, young people,
fantastic,
who were doing well, helping agriculture to develop, and it hadn't taken much money. It had taken the right kind of training and the right kind of inputs, and you can see that happening. So those are examples of where I think both women and young people can be helped, but it's still very small inputs at the moment.
Thank you, Sir Gordon, that's brilliant. And just one last question about mobile technology, if I may.
Yeah.
Often we talk about that, and you've edited a recent publication on that too.
Do you have a copy of it?
I do, thank you. But it's a really interesting piece. The one with Sam Dryden.
Yeah, sure.
And could this be a panacea? It's been another part of the solution to... It's
a part of the solution. We know how it's working. It works, of course, the same way as it does in the UK. It enables people to keep in touch with each other. If you've got an extended family and you're in a village and your relatives are in the city, you can keep in touch with them, and maybe your 1 or 2 children could go and live with the relatives in the city, and that helps you, and so that kind of thing happens. We know you can get information about markets on a mobile phone. We know that you can get subsidy on the phone for buying fertilizers. In Nigeria, there are now 15 million farmers getting subsidies through their mobile phone. What I think is potentially exciting is that the mobile phone use, and the use of large-scale data as well, can accelerate the agricultural transformation in agriculture in Africa. Many African countries still have to go through a transformation of agriculture in the way that Asia has done. And if it follows the Asian model, it'll take time. I'd like to see it speeded up, and I think the mobile phones and the other data systems can make it go faster. And that's the argument I made in the chapter in the book on African farmers in the digital age. But I don't know. I'm just being thought-provoking.
Very thought-provoking, Sir Gordon. And are you optimistic, my family? The book I'm trying to write is an optimistic book, saying we can put things on the right track despite the.
Well, I am, but I am an optimist. But then I usually have to qualify that by saying I think it's genetic.
Is it the Conway? There's a Conway gene.
There's a gene in there. Well, other people have got it too. I mean, you can always tell when you meet somebody who's the same way. That despite all the things going wrong, I must admit, what's going on in the world at the moment doesn't encourage much optimism. I mean, I haven't lived through such a terrible time as this before. You have to go back to the origins of the Second World War to see the kind of hell that's in the world today. I mean, we've had terrible things. We've had what happened in Rwanda. We've had the Biafran War. We've had issues in the Congo. But it's the hell that's breaking loose in the Middle East, or has broken loose in the Middle East, and the terrible events in Aleppo. And it's very difficult to come out of sitting and watching what's happening in Aleppo and in other parts of Syria and Iraq and not be really very, very pessimistic about the future. But there we are.
We keep trying.
Yeah.
We keep trying to do the best we can and hope for the best. Yes. Well, Sir Gordon,
Good, not at all.
thank you very much.
Have you got a title for your book yet?
It's called A Restored Earth, 10 Paths to a Hopeful Future.
That sounds good.
But it's I mean, I'm really just beginning. I mean, I've done a lot of note-taking and reading, and I'm hoping to write it next year. My wife and I are having our first child in April, so that sort of concentrates the mind.
That's wonderful.
Thanks, Sir Gordon.
And how much do you work for the Prince's Trust?
Well, I'm full-time, so I took the day off today to do this interview and a couple of others.
That's good. I didn't realise you were full-time.
Yes, good. Yeah. So my day job there is the rainforest, really, and the push on rainforest, but I also led on the soil meeting that you kindly came to.
Yes.
Yes, it's a full-time.
Yeah, I thought that meeting was good. I was a bit provocative, but then that's what I usually
You spoke
am.
very well.
I thought it came through well. I was particularly impressed with Roy Stewart's final comments.
Brilliant,
gave
wasn't he?
Gave us a real bit of a lift at the end.
Yes, he's one of the best, I feel.
Yes, Stewart. I think he is. I heard him speak about Burma last week.
Really?
Very, very good.
Was that at Parliament or at...
No, it was at the Royal Geographical Society. It wasn't a RGS event, it was a separate event. And I went largely because my wife is an expert on Burma. And so, yeah, she works with the Shan people of northern Burma.
Gosh.
And so I went to,
very good.
To hear him, and he was dramatic. He gave, basically, it was about Burma and beyond, but actually what he did do was a critique of the current aid policies of the West, which I thought was interesting.
Across the piece, yeah. Fascinating.
Well, because he's worked in Afghanistan and Pakistan and elsewhere, and you can see what's going on.
No, he's a brilliant man. Well, yes, we hope to take that and a soil agenda forward next year and follow the French government's work on that with interest. But so we'll keep in touch on that.
Yeah, no, I'd like to keep in touch on that because I think it's worth trying to do. It's tough, but I think it's worth trying to do. And I think Ratan Lal is my guru on all these things.
He gave a very good presentation, didn't he? And it was impressive. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Sir Gordon, and.